You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Knowledge reuse is about systematically leveraging what already exists: artifacts, assets, and expertise, so teams can deliver faster, with higher quality and lower cost, without reinventing the wheel each time. The orientation frames reuse not as laziness but as discipline, building once, using many times, and refining collectively. When teams adopt proven solutions, they avoid repeating mistakes, reduce variability, and provide users with more consistent experiences. This approach allows scarce resources to be invested in genuinely novel challenges instead of recreating standard components. Reuse also accelerates onboarding since newcomers inherit established patterns and don't have to discover everything from scratch. At scale, systematic reuse becomes a primary driver of productivity and reliability, multiplying organizational learning. The challenge lies in making reuse deliberate, supported by infrastructure, governance, and culture, so that it becomes the default behavior rather than an afterthought or a reluctant compromise. The value proposition of reuse rests on tangible outcomes such as reduced cycle time, fewer defects, and improved user experience. Teams that build on proven assets avoid the delays of reinventing components, and because those components have already been tested in multiple contexts, defect rates drop. Users benefit when products share patterns, as consistency lowers confusion and increases trust. For example, using a standardized authentication service shortens development cycles, reduces vulnerabilities, and provides users with familiar, predictable login behavior. Reuse also streamlines compliance, since pre-approved patterns reduce regulatory overhead. Beyond efficiency, reuse fosters alignment. Teams converge on shared ways of solving recurring problems, which strengthens interoperability. The benefits compound over time, as reused assets mature and evolve, creating network effects. In short, the reuse value proposition is not abstract. It delivers measurable improvements in speed, quality, and trustworthiness, making it a cornerstone of scalable delivery practices. Asset categories span a wide spectrum, all of which can accelerate work when reused deliberately. Code libraries provide common functions and algorithms, reducing redundant development. Shared services, such as payment, authentication, or logging, offer robust, maintained capabilities. Templates provide scaffolding for documents, pipelines, or infrastructure definitions, ensuring consistency. Test datasets accelerate validation, while infrastructure patterns like standard Kubernetes deployments provide proven operational reliability. Decision records capture reasoning behind past choices, offering guidance on trade-offs without requiring teams to repeat debates. By inventorying these categories, organizations reveal the breadth of reusable assets available. Each category reduces toil in its domain. Templates prevent formatting churn, services reduce operational risk, and decision records shortcut analysis. Together, they form a library of building blocks. Recognizing and cataloging these assets is the first step toward making reuse systematic, because without visibility, even the richest set of assets lies dormant and underutilized. People networks complement artifacts by supplying context, caveats, and nuanced guidance. Experts, mentors, and guilds bring the tacit knowledge that documentation alone cannot capture. For example, an expert may explain when a library is safe to use and when its performance profile makes it unsuitable. Mentors help newcomers interpret patterns and understand exceptions. Guilds create communities where practitioners share experiences, troubleshoot problems, and refine shared practices. These human channels transform reuse from static reference to living conversation, accelerating learning and avoiding misapplication. They also provide resilience. When artifacts are incomplete, networks fill gaps. When patterns evolve, networks update members faster than documents alone. By investing in people networks, organizations create flexible, responsive complements to repositories. Artifacts and people together make reuse both reliable and adaptable, ensuring that the knowledge system is not brittle but enriched by collective expertise and dialogue. Discoverability mechanisms make reuse practical by ensuring that assets can be found quickly and confidently. Catalogs organize reusable components with metadata such as scope, maturity, and compatibility. Portals provide centralized access, reducing time wasted searching across disconnected systems. API registries document endpoints, contracts, and version histories, making integration straightforward. Effective discoverability requires more than listing, it requires clarity. For example, each catalog entry should include use cases, known limitations, and compatibility guarantees. This transparency helps teams trust and adopt assets rather than defaulting to bespoke development. Searchability and categorization also reduce duplication, as teams can see what already exists before creating anew. Without discoverability, even the best assets remain underused. With it, reuse becomes natural, as teams find what they need where they expect it, with enough confidence to integrate quickly. Discoverability is therefore the bridge between intent and adoption, turning repositories into accelerators of delivery. Qualification criteria help consumers trust that assets meet the standards required for reuse. These criteria cover quality, security, performance, and documentation. For example, a library may only be listed as reusable once it passes automated tests, undergoes security scanning, and includes clear usage examples. Performance characteristics ensure that components scale appropriately, while documentation depth ensures usability. By defining readiness criteria, organizations prevent half-baked assets from cluttering catalogs and wasting time. These bars also incentivize producers to raise quality, knowing that their work will only gain adoption if it is demonstrably trustworthy. Consumers benefit from confidence that listed assets are safe to use, reducing the need for duplicate vetting. Qualification transforms reuse from opportunistic scavenging into systematic adoption of reliable components. Over time, high standards also raise the overall baseline of organizational practices, as every reusable asset embodies rigor and trustworthiness. Compatibility and versioning practices protect consumers as assets evolve. Semantic versioning communicates whether changes are backward compatible, while changelogs provide transparency about updates. Deprecation policies signal when support will end, giving teams time to migrate safely. For example, moving a service from version 1.2 to 2.0 should include clear guidance on breaking changes and migration steps. These practices prevent surprises and allow teams to plan integration confidently. Without them, reuse becomes risky, as consumers fear that adopting a shared asset may expose them to unpredictable breakage. With strong compatibility practices, reuse accelerates rather than slows delivery. Versioning also fosters trust between producers and consumers, as both sides share responsibility for safe evolution. Over time, this discipline builds ecosystems of reusable assets that are not only stable but adaptable, balancing innovation with reliability. Licensing and intellectual property guidelines protect organizations from legal or compliance risks during reuse. Internal reuse rights must be explicit. Teams need clarity that they can adopt each other's work without restriction. External reuse carries more complexity, as third-party libraries often come with licenses that dictate how they can be used. Open-source dependencies may require attribution, redistribution of source, or restrictions on commercial use. Without clear guidelines, teams may inadvertently expose the organization to legal liabilities. By documenting obligations and embedding checks into catalogs and tooling, organizations reduce risk. IP guidelines also encourage contributions upstream, ensuring compliance while benefiting from community innovation. Clarity in licensing empowers teams to reuse confidently, knowing they are protected. It also signals professionalism, reinforcing that reuse is not only about speed and quality, but also about responsibility and legal stewardship. Fit assessment frameworks prevent the misapplication of assets outside their intended design envelope. Even high-quality components are not universally applicable. Frameworks map context and constraints to asset suitability. For example, a load testing library designed for web applications may be unsuitable for embedded systems. Fit assessments provide structured questions. Does this asset meet performance needs? Is it compatible with current infrastructure? Are its assumptions valid in this context? By formalizing evaluation, teams avoid costly mistakes where reused assets underperform or introduce instability. Fit frameworks balance enthusiasm with caution, reinforcing that reuse is not blind adoption but thoughtful leverage. They also reduce friction between producers and consumers by clarifying conditions of use. Over time, these frameworks build maturity, ensuring that reuse accelerates delivery without compromising reliability or creating hidden risks. Inner-source governance opens reuse ecosystems by inviting contributions across teams. Assets are treated like open-source projects but within organizational boundaries. Consumers can report issues, propose enhancements, or contribute code, with maintainers curating quality. This governance keeps assets healthy and relevant, as no single team shoulders the entire burden. It also fosters collaboration, as improvements flow back into shared libraries rather than fragmenting into hidden forks. Inner-source democratizes ownership, balancing stewardship with broad participation. For example, a shared CI/CD pipeline may be maintained by a core team, but improved by contributions from multiple product teams. This model ensures that assets evolve in response to diverse needs. Governance provides structure review processes, coding standards, and contribution guidelines, so openness does not compromise quality. By embedding InnerSource, organizations transform reuse into a culture of shared stewardship and continuous improvement. Platform and enablement teams accelerate reuse by providing paved roads, opinionated, supported workflows that bundle reusable assets into coherent experiences. For example, a paved road for microservices may include standardized service scaffolds, CI/CD pipelines, monitoring defaults, and security baselines. Teams adopting the road gain speed and safety, as guardrails reduce variability and common errors. Paved roads also increase adoption because they reduce cognitive overhead. Teams follow proven paths instead of piecing together components independently. Platform teams act as curators, integrating and supporting assets so they remain reliable. This model scales reuse from isolated components to entire workflows, amplifying benefits. By offering paved roads, organizations reduce friction, raise consistency, and accelerate delivery, while still allowing innovation when teams deliberately step off the road. Paved roads make reuse practical at scale, embedding it into daily work seamlessly. Incentive design addresses the cultural barrier known as "not invented here" bias. Teams often prefer building their own solutions, perceiving reuse as constraining or less prestigious. Incentives must recognize and reward adoption, contribution, and maintenance. For example, career frameworks may credit engineers for improving shared libraries as much as for shipping features. Recognition programs may highlight teams that save time and improve quality through reuse. Incentives align personal motivation with organizational goals, countering bias. They also reinforce fairness, ensuring that maintenance and stewardship work is valued alongside new creation. Over time, incentives reshape culture, making reuse the default behavior. By celebrating collaboration and collective impact, organizations replace pride in reinvention with pride in contribution. Incentive design ensures that reuse thrives not only technically, but culturally, embedding it as a shared norm of professional excellence. Risk management for reuse acknowledges that shared components introduce shared vulnerabilities. A flaw in one library can ripple across many consumers. Supply chain exposure also increases when external dependencies are reused broadly. Risk management practices include vulnerability scanning, coordinated patching, and dependency mapping. For example, when a security flaw is discovered in a common framework, centralized coordination ensures that patches are tested and deployed consistently. Risk management also includes transitive dependencies, those indirectly imported through reused assets, which must be tracked. By addressing these risks systematically, organizations prevent reuse from becoming a liability. Shared assets remain accelerators, not weak points. Over time, disciplined risk management builds confidence, showing that reuse is not reckless, but responsible. By embedding safeguards, organizations balance speed with security, ensuring that reuse strengthens rather than undermines resilience. Measurement baselines quantify the return on reuse. Metrics may include reuse rates, time saved compared to bespoke builds, defect differential between reused and custom components, and adoption across teams. For example, if a shared CI/CD pipeline reduces setup time by 70% and cuts integration defects in half, the ROI is clear. These metrics validate investment in shared assets and inform where to expand or retire efforts. Measurement also encourages accountability, showing whether reuse practices deliver the promised value. Over time, metrics refine strategy, ensuring that resources go to the most impactful assets. By making benefits visible, measurement reinforces adoption as teams see evidence of collective gains. Measurement turns reuse from an abstract good into a measurable driver of performance, aligning organizational priorities with everyday practice. Anti-patterns must be recognized and corrected to sustain healthy reuse ecosystems. Over-centralized monolith libraries become brittle and discourage adoption. Hidden forks fragment effort as teams clone rather than contribute back. Copy-paste reuse creates divergence without traceability, undermining maintainability. These patterns erode trust and reduce efficiency. Corrective practices include modular design, inner source contribution paths, and versioned dependencies. For example, instead of copying a library, teams are encouraged to fork transparently and propose improvements upstream. Anti-pattern awareness prevents repositories from becoming cluttered with fragile, inconsistent assets. By naming and addressing these issues openly, organizations maintain the integrity of reuse. Over time, this vigilance creates a culture where reuse is trusted, efficient, and sustainable. Anti-pattern correction ensures that reuse accelerates rather than slows delivery, preserving its role as a strategic enabler of speed, quality, and cost control. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. A reuse workflow defines how assets move from discovery to adoption in a structured, transparent way. The workflow typically includes 4 stages: request, evaluate, integrate, and contribute back. Requesting means that a team identifies a need and locates a candidate asset. Evaluation tests whether the asset fits context, meets standards, and passes security and performance checks. Integration embeds the asset into live systems with monitoring and safeguards. Finally, contribute back ensures that lessons, fixes, or enhancements flow upstream, improving the shared version for others. Each stage has owners and acceptance signals, such as approval by a steward, completion of integration tests, or submission of a pull request. This workflow prevents fragmentation and ensures that reuse strengthens the ecosystem rather than splintering it. By formalizing the steps, organizations replace opportunistic adoption with disciplined collaboration, ensuring that assets grow in value as they circulate across teams. Curation boards act as quality gatekeepers, reviewing submissions to the catalog against established standards. Without curation, repositories risk being flooded with unvetted or low-quality components that erode trust. Boards evaluate new assets on dimensions such as testing coverage, documentation completeness, security posture, and adoption readiness. For example, a proposed logging library might be rejected if it lacks performance benchmarks, or approved if it includes comprehensive examples. These reviews provide accountability and ensure that only reliable, supported assets enter the ecosystem. Boards also manage lifecycle decisions, such as deprecating outdated components or consolidating duplicates. This governance model balances inclusivity with quality, giving teams confidence that catalog entries are worth using. Over time, curation boards create a culture of excellence, where shared assets are not only available but consistently trustworthy, reinforcing reuse as a default practice rather than a gamble. Golden paths and starter kits accelerate common scenarios by providing paved roads for frequent workflows. These kits bundle reusable assets into coherent, ready-to-use patterns. For example, a service starter kit might include code scaffolds, CI/CD pipelines, security baselines, and monitoring defaults. By following a golden path, teams reduce setup time, avoid variability, and integrate proven safeguards automatically. This reduces both errors and compliance risk, as standards are embedded by default. Starter kits also encourage consistency across teams, making systems easier to operate and support. For newcomers, golden paths shorten the learning curve, ensuring that best practices are adopted without requiring deep prior expertise. Over time, golden paths evolve through community contributions, capturing new lessons and strengthening defaults. This approach scales reuse from individual assets to entire workflows, turning organizational wisdom into repeatable, supported acceleration for all delivery teams. API and contract standards ensure that reused services evolve safely over time. Explicit interfaces clarify what consumers can rely on, while backward compatibility policies prevent sudden breakage. Contract tests provide automated validation, confirming that updates do not violate expectations. For example, a shared authentication service may guarantee that version 1 endpoints remain stable until deprecation timelines expire, with automated tests protecting consumer integrations. These standards reduce fear of adoption, as teams trust that reuse will not introduce instability. They also improve communication between producers and consumers, setting shared expectations about change management. Strong contracts make reuse scalable, as assets can evolve without creating chaos. Over time, these practices build resilience into ecosystems of services, ensuring that interdependent teams can innovate confidently. By institutionalizing API and contract discipline, organizations transform reuse from a short-term convenience into a long-term enabler of agility and reliability. Documentation standards for reusable assets are critical for confidence and adoption. Minimalist or inconsistent documentation undermines trust, forcing consumers to guess at usage and limits. Standards require quick starts for immediate onboarding, detailed examples for context, explicit boundaries to clarify where the asset applies, and troubleshooting guidance for common errors. For example, a library might include code snippets, performance notes, and known incompatibilities with older frameworks. Clear documentation lowers adoption friction, allowing teams to integrate quickly without repeated clarifications. It also reduces support load on asset owners, as answers are embedded up front. Over time, consistently documented assets become part of organizational infrastructure, expected and relied upon. By codifying standards, organizations make documentation a first-class element of asset quality, equal in importance to code or configuration. This discipline turns reuse into a smooth, reliable practice rather than a frustrating, time-consuming gamble. Enablement and training ensure that reuse ecosystems are understood and adopted widely. Catalogs, paved roads, and contribution norms must be introduced during onboarding and reinforced through refresher sessions. Without training, teams may ignore shared assets, defaulting to bespoke solutions out of habit or lack of awareness. Enablement programs demonstrate the value of reuse, explain how to navigate catalogs, and show how to contribute improvements back. For example, a new engineer might receive training on how to use the internal package manager, evaluate fit, and submit issues. Training also provides cultural reinforcement, countering the not invented here bias by celebrating shared wins. Over time, enablement builds confidence, making reuse the obvious choice rather than the exception. By investing in education, organizations ensure that reuse practices are embedded in daily habits, sustaining adoption and accelerating value generation across teams and projects. Tooling integration embeds reuse into the flow of daily work rather than relying on memory or ad hoc search. Package managers, templates, and dependency checkers ensure that shared assets are accessible within development environments. For example, adding a dependency from the internal registry might be as simple as a single command, with quality checks enforced automatically. Templates in IDEs or CI/CD platforms provide scaffolds that default to reusable patterns. Dependency checkers alert teams when assets are outdated or vulnerable, prompting updates without manual tracking. This integration reduces friction, making reuse the path of least resistance. It also increases consistency, as teams draw from the same sources. Over time, integrated tooling creates an ecosystem where reuse is seamless, automatic, and trusted. By embedding assets directly into workflows, organizations ensure that reuse is not only encouraged, but practically unavoidable. Change management and deprecation policies protect consumers during asset evolution. Migration guides, timelines, and automated checks reduce disruption when assets are updated or retired. For example, a library scheduled for deprecation might include warnings in logs, documentation updates, and automated tools to identify affected systems. Clear timelines prevent surprises, giving teams space to plan migrations. Automated checks reinforce compliance, ensuring that unsupported versions are phased out. These policies balance innovation with stability, enabling progress without chaos. They also reinforce accountability, showing that asset owners are responsible for consumer safety. Over time, disciplined change management builds trust in the ecosystem, as consumers see that reuse is supported by predictable, respectful practices. This trust accelerates adoption, as teams know that commitments to stability will be honored even as assets evolve. Outcome monitoring provides evidence of whether reuse delivers on its promises. Comparing incident rates, performance metrics, and support load for reused versus bespoke components reveals impact. For example, if services built on paved roads show fewer outages and faster onboarding, the benefit is clear. Monitoring also informs retirement, highlighting low-value assets that consume maintenance without adoption. These insights guide investment, ensuring that stewardship is focused on high-leverage components. Outcome monitoring also validates cultural claims, showing stakeholders that reuse is not only efficient but also safer and more sustainable. By tying reuse to measurable outcomes, organizations sustain momentum and justify ongoing funding. Monitoring closes the loop, proving that reuse is more than theory. It is a demonstrable driver of organizational performance and resilience. Security and software bill of materials practices ensure that shared assets remain trustworthy across the dependency chain. By tracking provenance, vulnerabilities, and patch levels, organizations can respond quickly to supply chain risks. For example, a central vulnerability scanner may flag an outdated library used across dozens of systems, triggering coordinated patching. Maintaining a software bill of materials, SBOM, provides visibility into transitive dependencies, ensuring that risks are not hidden. Security practices also include coordinated response plans so that when vulnerabilities arise, patches are delivered consistently and rapidly. By embedding these safeguards, organizations make reuse both efficient and safe. Without security practices, shared assets become single points of failure. With them, reuse strengthens overall resilience. SBOM practices also align with regulatory requirements, reinforcing trust externally. Security discipline ensures that the speed of reuse never compromises safety, keeping ecosystems reliable under pressure. Communities for asset owners foster collaboration and shared responsibility. Maintaining reusable assets requires coordination across teams, not isolated heroics. Communities create forums for backlog review, roadmap alignment, and support patterns. For example, owners of different libraries may coordinate to ensure consistency in logging, error handling, or documentation standards. These communities also provide mentorship, supporting new maintainers and reducing burnout. By sharing practices, asset owners raise quality across the ecosystem, ensuring that all assets meet expectations for usability and reliability. Communities transform maintenance from hidden labor into a visible, collective investment. Over time, this collaboration creates coherence, as reusable assets converge on shared standards and integrated roadmaps. Communities reinforce that reuse is an organizational capability, not a side project, sustaining its health and impact across teams and time. Vendor and open-source strategies ensure that external reuse is sustainable and safe. Many shared assets build on open-source projects or third-party services. Strategies must align upstream contributions, patch flows, and license compliance. For example, if a widely reused open-source library requires urgent patching, contributing fixes upstream ensures long-term stability, while local teams adopt interim mitigations. Vendor strategies define contact paths, SLAs, and escalation protocols, ensuring that external dependencies are supported as part of the reuse ecosystem. License compliance protects against legal risk while enabling responsible use. By engaging actively with external sources, organizations strengthen both local and global ecosystems. These strategies prevent external reuse from becoming fragile or risky. Over time, alignment with vendors and open-source projects creates resilience, as external assets evolve in partnership with internal practices. This external alignment is crucial since modern systems are deeply interconnected and reliant on shared, global foundations. Funding and stewardship models prevent shared assets from becoming under-resourced liabilities. Without dedicated budget or time, maintenance and documentation are often neglected, undermining trust. Funding models allocate resources explicitly for asset health, recognizing maintenance as strategic work. Stewardship roles ensure accountability, with named owners responsible for backlogs, updates, and roadmaps. For example, a reusable testing framework may receive funding for full-time maintainers who ensure compatibility and security. These models also support succession, ensuring continuity when individuals move on. By resourcing stewardship properly, organizations ensure that reuse remains an accelerator rather than a drag. It also signals cultural respect, valuing the invisible labor that sustains shared assets. Over time, stable funding and stewardship prevent decay, ensuring that reuse ecosystems remain healthy and impactful at scale. Sustainability checks ensure that reuse continues to accelerate delivery rather than becoming a burden. Over time, assets proliferate, overlaps emerge, and some components lose relevance. Sustainability practices prune low-value assets, consolidate duplicates, and refresh paved roads as technologies evolve. For example, if 3 libraries serve similar purposes, consolidation reduces confusion and maintenance overhead. Refreshing golden paths ensures they remain aligned with current best practices, not outdated defaults. Sustainability checks keep ecosystems lean and trusted, preventing bloat. They also ensure that reuse remains a net positive, accelerating speed, reducing risk, and improving quality rather than adding friction. By institutionalizing regular sustainability reviews, organizations preserve the agility and trust that make reuse valuable. This discipline ensures that reuse does not stagnate but evolves continuously, sustaining its role as a cornerstone of efficient, reliable delivery. Knowledge reuse synthesis emphasizes that systematic leverage of organizational assets and expertise is an engine of scale. Discoverability, qualification, and compatibility practices make reuse safe and efficient. Paved roads, starter kits, and documentation standards embed reuse into daily work, while inter-source governance and communities ensure assets remain healthy and relevant. Risk management, measurement, and sustainability checks protect trust and focus investment, while incentives and training embed reuse into culture. Vendor alignment and funding models extend resilience across external dependencies. Together, these practices transform reuse from opportunistic scavenging into disciplined acceleration, turning organizational learning into faster, safer, and more consistent delivery. Reuse is not only a cost-saving tactic, it is a cultural and technical capability that multiplies effectiveness across teams and time, making it one of the most powerful levers for scaling reliability and innovation. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.